So you're wondering, what is the right age for your teenager to start dating? Is there a black and white answer? Does the Bible give us any indication of the right way to approach this topic? We're going to talk about that today with Pastors Brad and Misti Helton. We hope you enjoy today's talk, Practical Christian Living. Let's get started.
The fact is, if you're asking this question today, then you are a really great parent. Now, I know you may not feel like it, but listen, if you clicked on this video, then that means you care, that you're asking the right questions and you're looking for godly answers in the way of how your kids, how your teenagers should be dating. So let's just start by talking about some guidelines, some boundaries. And honestly, that's where we have to start, because a lot of times our teenagers are like, hey, I'm a teenager, don't you trust me? Why do I have to have boundaries? Well, the fact is, guardrails, just like when you drive down the highway, right? And we cross those areas that are very dangerous to the left or to the right. Maybe you're going around the mountains or maybe you're crossing a lake. Guardrails are there for your protection. Well, that's the same thing when it comes to parenting, and especially when it comes to our kids dating. We need to help set the guardrails, and they're not going to thank you for it, at least not anytime soon.
Never.
They're not going to appreciate the boundaries that you set. They want free reign, but listen, as the parent, you've got to understand that they need the guardrails. They need the boundaries, and even more importantly, they need to understand why. Not just what, okay? Not just what you won't or you will or you won't let us do, but why.
And you might be one of those parents that says, I really want to just give them the liberty and the freedom to just make their own choices and decide for themselves what their dating life is going to look like, because let's face it, one day they're going to be an adult and they're going to need to learn how to do life, eventually. And so I'm just going to let them decide for themselves. And the reality is, when you do that as a parent, it's like you said, you're removing those guardrails,
Yep.
and which in essence, really what you're doing is you are removing yourself from your role and your responsibility
Yep.
as a parent, which is to protect them from possible danger or
Right.
scenarios or situations which could possibly harm them or bring destruction to not only the present but their future. I mean, just
Absolutely.
imagine, if you're totally hands off and you leave it up to your teenager to make decisions like this, your teenager could end up, having sex before marriage and having some big scars to have to
Right.
deal with spiritually as they deal with the regret of really bad decisions in their past. But a lot of this could be prevented if, as parents, we would truly just lean in and help guide them and help them to make some really good decisions.
What you really need to understand is, what is the purpose in dating? Okay? The purpose in dating is truly, in that sense, to find the person that God has created for you, okay, or for your teenager. So the concept of these kids dating at the age of like 12 and 13, they are nowhere near being ready to get married. So when we allow our kids to start down that path of relationships so young, we're also setting them up for failure. Talking to your kids on what the guidelines will look like as they begin to get a little older in their teenage years, it's going to be so very important. But helping them to understand, guys, we date to find the mate that God has for us. We date to find that person that God has created just for you.
All right, so let's look at a few different options. By and large, there's about two major schools of thought when it comes to Christian parenting, and so let's look at that. What are the two different schools of thought that we talk about and we look
Okay, so number one is something called courting. Okay, now you think to yourself, oh my gosh, that
What is
term
this?
seems so old
16,
school, right?
21?
Well, it basically just means this. It means the person that you are interested in comes over, hangs out at your house with your family, goes out to dinner with your family, goes out and does things with either of the families if both families have the same values. And really, that ought to be a given. If your kids are interested in someone else, you marry the other person's family. So if you are a Christian family, you want to make sure that you are helping guide your kids to, even if they have interest in other and a person of the opposite sex, that it's someone that has the same values as your family, okay? So the first one would be courting. The second is going to be dating, but with conditions.
Right.
Okay? So we'll kind of break both of these down for you, and we'll even tell you what we have done, having raised 4 teenagers up to this point.
Okay, so the question is, which route will you take? Well, before we look at that, before you make that decision, because this is a really big decision, there's 4 dangers that we want to share with you very quickly that are really, really common in your community. It's not just where we live, it's where you live
everywhere
as well. And the number one danger that your teenagers and teenagers in your community are dealing with is sexual promiscuity. Sexual promiscuity is rampant among teenagers right now. It really has been for years. Even when I was a teenager, things haven't really changed much. Right. But I think a big mistake that Christian parents make is they think that, well, if I just make sure that my teenager is in youth group and I send them on a Wednesday night to hear the things being taught that they should be taught from their youth pastor, then they're going to get it. They're going to know what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And the reality is there are a lot of teenagers that are being raised in Christian homes that are diving into sex before marriage, and their daughters are ending up pregnant. And it's horrible. It's not a situation you want to be in, but it is so very common. So this is one thing that you really want to consider and think about in regards to a danger that you're going to have to deal with as soon as you allow your teenager to start dating.
The church is here to support, and the church is here sometimes to bring the tough stuff. But as mom and dad, you've got to have these conversations, and you've got to help them to understand, like, sex is a great thing, but it's within the confines of marriage. That's where it's okay. That's where God intended it to hold a couple together. But the enemy takes everything that God intended for good, and he tries to turn it for evil. So what he wants to do is he knows the destruction that happens when 2 people come together who are not married. He knows the heartbreak. He knows that once you've sealed yourself in that covenant together, the destruction when you pull apart, right? And we see it all the time with teenagers, and unfortunately, even adults all the way up. All right. The second thing is binge drinking. This is very common. And again, it's not just with kids outside of church. Unfortunately, lots of students who go to youth group and lots of kids who grow up in Christian homes, our culture just says, it's okay. Everybody's doing it. It's just the thing to do. And even Christian kids know that the Bible says, don't be drunk, right? So the Bible doesn't specifically say don't drink. It just says don't be drunk with wine. Yeah. But they start down that path, and what we see over and over and over is alcohol brings distraction. And so they think to themselves, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And the next thing you know, it is a big deal. All right, the third danger is dating violence. Why don't you tell us, Brad, what does that look like in a dating relationship?
So just like any toxic relationship that you can think of, typically the man is the one that is exercising verbal abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse. Manipulation.
Belittling someone.
Yes. Yeah. And so you just think of the most toxic relationship you can think of. And you bring that into the picture when your teenage daughter is dating a guy, or your teenage son is dating a girl. And we begin to see these types of behaviors creep up even as teenagers because, well, let's face it, they've either seen it exhibited or they haven't had the guardrails or the conversations needed to teach them what a healthy biblical relationship looks like.
So then number 4, and as unfortunate as it is, date rape is a very big deal. Still to this day, we've been talking about it for years.
Today than it's ever been before.
Absolutely. So they say right now that 11 million women are a victim of date rape, whether that is due to alcohol consumption and then followed by date rape, or drugs that are mingled as well. And so without spending a whole lot of time on it, we want, before you set the guardrails for your family, for you to just be aware that in every community, right? We are in rural America, and we see this.
And we see it
all the time, okay? So you don't have to live in Chicago or New York or some big city around the world to have the dangers in dating. The fact is, it's everywhere in every community. And as parents, we've got to understand that as we make the decisions for how our kids will date.
Let's just talk now about the two different most common views of dating when it comes to Christian parents and how they look at it. So the first thing that we're going to talk about real quick is courting. So when it comes to courting, our definition was we're going to allow them to have a relationship with somebody that they have interest in, but we're going to make sure that that dating partner is going to maybe only come over to our house and hang out with us as a family, or maybe if we go out and we have a family night. Or, and we said this earlier in the video, you really need to know that young girl or boy's parents know them really well. Make sure that you have the same biblical values, the same standards, the same guardrails in place, because you want to make sure that if they are over at their house, if your child is over at their house, then they're upholding the same standards. And so we did that, and it worked really, really good.
Yeah. They honored us, but they didn't love it. So they would say things like, "Don't you trust us?" And we're like, listen, it's not about trust. It is about not putting you in a situation where the enemy can tempt you to make a bad choice. And so what we constantly help them to understand is the number one objective is that you get to know this person without having those emotional and sexual ties that the enemy is going to try to tempt you with. And it's really, really, really important to not put yourself in a situation alone together where you would be tempted, right, to have sex before marriage, or heaven forbid, any of the other dangers coming into play. I cannot reiterate this enough. We didn't have rules without relationship. We had rules, we had guidelines, and there was constant conversation around it. Constant. We love you, and because we love you, these are boundaries that we've set up for your protection. And we would say, hey, the easier thing would be for us to be like, do whatever you want to do. But that's not what parenting is about. Parenting is about doing the hard things with the gift called your children that God has given you.
All right, so let's look at the second option today. That's dating with conditions, what we would just call group dating. And group dating, I think, is really still a decent option. It's going to just really come down to the maturity level of your own son or daughter. But what's most important is to make sure that you know, where are they going, what are they doing, who are the friends that they are with, how well do we know their friends, do we know their friends' parents? So you want to make sure. Now it makes it a little bit more complicated because there's more people involved. You want to make sure that you know all their parents. You want to make sure that y'all are on the same page, because we have to protect their environment, as we've been talking about this whole time.
This is where having your kids in youth group is huge.
It's huge.
Find a great church. This is going to be the best environment for them to find godly friends. And I realize, just like we said, Christian teenagers do have their struggles, but Christian teenagers together are definitely going to be stronger.
Hold each other accountable.
Right? Exactly, because most of them are striving for the right things. It's just whether or not they put themselves in an environment where they're tempted and then they give in. As we're wrapping up today, I want to just tell you the number one thing as you are setting these guidelines for your teen and their dating is going to be mom and dad being on the same page. And I would just say this.
You have to be on the same page.
We're married, have been married almost 22 years. If you're in a situation where you have mom and dad that are divorced, as hard as that is going to be, you guys really need to get on the same page. If you love your kids, with how you're going to allow them to date. So,
to answer this question specifically, because that's why you clicked on this video, what exactly is the right age for my son or daughter to begin dating? And really, here's what it comes down to. It comes down to you. It comes down to your son or daughter and their level of maturity, their level of their relationship with God and where they're at with Him and how responsible they are. You know, if we had to just give a hard line number, we would say in respect to the two different types of dating, which would be courting or dating with conditions, group dating, we would say definitely no younger than 17 years old. And that is a 17-year-old that is highly responsible and you can trust. They understand the guardrails and you know that they're going to honor it. For some, for some of you, it might have to be a little bit older because, your child just hasn't matured to that point to where you feel like you can trust them. So I hope this has helped you. I hope this has been beneficial to you today, this talk on practical Christian living. If it has been, then please comment below and let us know that it's been a blessing to you. And we hope to see you again very, very